split in some way. No? Also historically, because it was produced all through this process like confessions, etc. But when today we have, for instance, in the Lacanian model, a split subject, etc., we must not forget that this is perhaps constitutively Western subjectivity is split, has both moments, desubjectivation and subjectivation going together and producing one the other. No? There is a kind of a chiasm there also, no? Because in confession it's clear, and the very process of subjectivation is achieved through a process of desubjectivation, so they really go together. Because,
I just wanted to add one more thing about shame. I feel like that the idea of desubjectivation can sort of inspire a lot of feelings that there's maybe some sort of oppression or repression or lack of freedom going on, some lack of the subject. But as you say, something like psychoanalysis just sort of sees subjectivity or the subject as a process of subjectivation and desubjectivation. And it tries to ascribe notions of freedom and subject to guilt and shame, to the point where there's really nothing that you could take away to ever release someone from shame. Like your example of, like, let's say you're naked in front of a bunch of people, I would actually more call that embarrassment, because some people might be nudists, they might not be ashamed. But there's a more radical version of shame where, say, you are naked on a stage and you think people have seen you and so you're embarrassed, but then you find out that there's no one in the audience. That's more like shame, because you were embarrassed for nobody, you felt something for no one.
But I refer to shame, I use the example of shame because Emmanuel Levinas, in a beautiful essay of 1935 called De l'évasion, takes this example, but he makes other examples also quite interesting. For instance, the problem of nausea. He said, what happens when you feel the necessity to vomit? And then he uses this as a paradigm of subjectivity. He said, there too, there is something that is continuously pushing towards yourself, because you feel that it's there. But this you cannot assume, because it's at the same time, repulsion and repulsion. So, and he makes a lot of this example in which a subject is, as he says, inchiodato, nailed down to himself, and he cannot evade, as you say. You know? In nausea, we cannot evade from the nausea. In shame also, we cannot evade from the shame. So we are consigned, absolutely consigned. But to what? To a subjectivity that we cannot assume, because we have to vomit it. But this is, I think, so I mean, we can imagine even very concrete model in which we see, and it doesn't depend from an external oppression, like for the Muslim, and there is clear there is something which we produce through oppression. So there's nothing to do with the freedom or oppression.
Yes, regarding this issue of subjectivity, subjectivation, I would like to bring up again your Italian friends that were talking in this political meeting about movements without knowing very well what is a movement, what is the idea of a movement. But they established the difference between the industrial capitalism and immaterial post-40s, post-industrial capitalism in the problem of subjectivity. For them, we are in the post-industrial capitalism when the subjectivity is working for the capital, when subjectivity is in the core of the production. In the industrial capitalism, the key in order to understand the dynamic of accumulation of the capital was just the time of work. not the human subjectivity. They say that when all the human characteristics, all the things that define us as human are working for the capital, we are in this new empire, in this new post-industrial immaterial capitalism. My question is, how do you see the relationship between subjectivity and the present model of capital production?
So that's an interesting point. So as you said, how Negri and his friends, grosso modo, sees the problem, and this way to look to the problem of post-Taylorist capitalism is precisely what, for instance, people like Badiou will criticize when he said to me, Negri thinks that communism is the heart of capitalism. In some way, I think in some way, Badiou is right. Because assuming this position, Negri seems to think that now, today, the real core of production is this new subject we have, so that it's not clear if this is really an anti-capitalist position. The risk of Negri position today is that how really this is alternative, really in a stronger sense against capitalism. Because then the capitalist becomes just a bad man who comes from this situation and try to exploit it. I don't think it's so simple, no? Where I strongly disagree with Negri also in the fact that the main concept of capitalism, like great part of the communist tradition, they share them. Both communism and capitalism is convinced that the main value is production, work, production. But if you share this main concept of the idea of capitalism, why you should be different from them? So, and then also this new subjectivity, they call it the common intellect, the new subjectivity, which is also general intellect. So this showed not to be much as an antagonist subject. It's less antagonist than the worker was. Because it's very easy. These people just are put to work, and they are very glad if they work in advertisement and whatever. So why they should be more antagonists than the worker? I don't know what you think.
In my opinion, the book that I like much of Negri is Que fare nel che fare. What can we do with the Lenin book? What is to be done? In this book, Negri tried to analyze what Lenin was thinking in this book, and he said that Lenin was analyzing the factory as the principal element of the capitalist production, and he thought that the party should imitate in all the ways the capitalist factory, and that's the reason because he thought in this moment we need a very hierarchized party with a core of intellectuals leading the party. Even if I live in a very agricultural country like Russia, the working class is the most important people in order to do revolution. Negri I think he's thinking something very similar when he said, now the production is immaterial, the subjectivity, the human capacities are the key in order to understand the dynamic of capital accumulation. So it's specifically there where is the core production, where is...
it's the same model. Now we have to imitate this new model.
Exactly. The revolution is in the heart of the capitalism. We have to imitate capitalism, the capital subjectivity, in order to change everything.
Yeah. But what happened? I mean, this is the main feature in